26th. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Secretary, will you call the roll, please? We don't have a, so we can start as a subcommittee. Yes. Perfect. Please. So we'll start this as a subcommittee. So at this point, we'd like to start off with the minutes from the May 22nd, 2013 meeting.
Minutes ready for your approval?
Yes.
We can't even vote on those yet. So
Okay.
The reports and the
Okay. Okay, we'll start off with the reports.
Well, we can give an update on the executive officer statement.
Very good, please.
So we have 4 updates to share with you tonight, and the updates that we wanted to announce is related to the May apportionments. We did allocate over $520 million, or close to $520 million, for a number of projects in May, and again, although we won't, we'll have a very limited agenda in July, what we wanted to highlight is we have released $244 million, and our agenda in July will be very light, so it won't be reflective until August. So we just want to give you an announcement that there's nearly half of that money has been released so far. And just to remind those folks who haven't submitted those fund release documents and the other documents required, please do so by August 20th. And that's the timeline associated with you coming in for your approval. We also wanted to share is, I know we're trying to clarify, the priority funding request, the filing timelines just ended June 6, and I wanted to share with the board, we did have some updates, last minute updates, and the purpose of the updates was really trying to clarify those folks who are required to submit a certification. So there were actually over $755 million that were eligible to submit in this certification round. We did receive 248 certifications, and so 110 did compete. There were folks that did not submit, and 138 of those projects, there were actually a carve-out. There's 74 projects that are not required to submit, and that's what we wanted to clarify in our item. And again, I apologize for the last-minute update, but those programs that are not required to submit certification specifically relate to some of the charter programs, the joint use, the career tech education, and the overcrowded relief grant program. So again, those are not subject to the timelines, although when they do want to compete for the cash and they're ready to go, they should submit a certification during that time. And so there is updates on our website related to the list itself. Those lists of those folks who are not required to compete are shaded like a gold color. So again, just to highlight to the board that update. The next item I wanted to update the board on is the true unfunded approvals. And again, that's the other list that we maintain because we have lack of bond authority. Last month we did move some projects over, and they actually did receive bond authority associated with that. This month's agenda we are presenting a project that will have bond authority associated, and so they're actually moving off the true unfunded list to now the unfunded list. There were 2 projects this month, and that's reflected in your consent agenda. The last item I wanted to share is on July 10th. We're having a very brief consent-only agenda. And we did share last month that we had over $38 million, and the $38 million was as a result of bond proceeds that's still available. And we got to everybody that we could on the list. We had excess cash in Proposition 47 and 55, and that excess cash actually will result in some disbursements next month. And so now that we have a new certification round, we can, the board can act on those certifications. So as of July 1st, again, the purpose is to get the cash awarded to those projects, so that will be reflected in the consent agenda. And that's what I have to share tonight.
Okay, thank you. Is there any public comment? All right, seeing none, we now have a quorum, and so Secretary, if you could please call the roll.
Certainly. Senator Hancock. Here. Senator Weiland. Senator Liu. Assemblymember Buchanan. Assemblymember Hagman. Here. Assemblymember Nazarian. Esteban Almanza.
Here.
Kathleen Moore.
Here.
Cesar Diaz.
Here.
Tom Dyer.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, now that the quorum's been established, and I'll make a second request for any public comment.
Sure, I'll move the minutes too in the consent calendar.
We have a motion. Is there a second? Now, it's one thing there was a motion for the consent agenda as well.
Do the minutes first.
Yeah, we'll do the minutes first, yeah.
Senator Hancock? Aye. Assemblymember Buchanan? Aye. Assemblymember Hagman?
Aye.
Esteban Almanza?
Aye.
Kathleen Moore?
Aye.
Cesar Diaz?
Aye.
Tom Dyer?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, now that the minutes have been moved in, we have the consent agenda from Ms. Silverman.
Yes, consent agenda is ready for your approval.
Okay. We have also a potential motion for the gateway for the consent.
So moved.
I'll second it. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Before we take action, I'd like to make a few comments on the gateway appeal, and just for the record to note that, the circumstances are truly unique in this manner, and this charter school had an agreement to use the facility with the prior district, being the Grant Unified School District. That agreement was in May of 2007, and from the record presented to the board, the Grant Union District intended to enter into a long-term use agreement with Gateway. But that did not happen because the Grant Union District went through a reorganization where the Grant Unified was absorbed, or it was unified with the new district, Twin Rivers. That happened in November of 2007, and that occurred independent of any actions by Gateway. The charter school has been attempting to negotiate terms for use of the facility with the new unified school district, that being Twin Rivers, for several years, approximately 4 years. And the last point, is that the statute and regulations are silent to the issue before the board and only address the initial eligibility criteria. One thing I'd like to do is I'd like to ask the staff to confirm that if the rehabilitation project is rescinded, the money would go back to the charter school facilities program to be used the next time a filing round was created for the program. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you. And I just, we have a motion to approve the consent agenda, including the approval of the Gateway appeal?
You did in a second.
Okay, in a second. Okay. So is there any public comment before we? Seeing none, take a roll.
Senator Hancock? Aye. Senator Liu? Aye. Assemblymember Buchanan? Aye. Assemblymember Hagman?
Aye.
Esteban Almanza?
Aye.
Kathleen Moore?
Aye.
Cesar Diaz?
Aye.
Tom Dyer?
Aye.
That motion carries. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Now we go to tab 5, which is the status of fund releases.
Yeah. So make it very quick. Again, we can turn to page 74. Although what I shared with you earlier is what we have dispersed in May is $1.7 million, very limited amount of money, but again, wanted to highlight to the board that the activity that is not reflected in this report is the funds that we have released from June 1st to June 14th. Again, $244 million have been dispersed to those school districts that have received the May apportionment. So we're making some significant progress, and you'll see some drawdowns at the next full board meeting. So again, I just wanted to highlight that. So I'm not sure if we have any questions related to this area.
See no questions. Is there any public comment on this? Okay. Next up is the status of funds.
So on the status of funds, we wanted to highlight there has been a number of projects that we have processed this month. One related to the Seismic program. We have a reflection of that activity. funding application is processed. We also have processed an overcrowded relief grant program project, a high performance project that's also tucked in with the overcrowded relief grant, and also a charter project that actually converted. So in Proposition 1D, we have authorized $41 million of unfunded approvals, and 4 projects have been approved as a result of the consent agenda being approved tonight. So in the category Proposition 55, which is the green category, $6.8 million also was processed tonight, 1 project. And as a result, we have processed over $47.8 million, and that reflects 5 projects in the consent agenda. Also tucked away in your consent agenda is we did share with the board that we had a number of projects that came in before the regulation timelines, and those projects, applications for funding, have been processed this month, and that's reflected on page 88. So that's not posted in the bond authority category because it's a true unfunded approval. So we have $46.9 million this month that actually were processed, and that relates to 12 projects. So once bond authority does become available, again, the goal is to get those, match those bond authority with the true unfunded approvals and be able to bring those projects forward in the consent agenda in the future.
Okay,
and that's all I have to share.
Thank you. Any questions or public comment? Okay. Our next is tab 8 regarding the Seismic Mitigation Program status report. Ms. Silverman?
Yeah, if I can grab your attention to actual page 109. I want to give the board an update. We've been given regular updates over probably the last 6 months, every 6 months. And although the voters did approve Proposition 1D, and it provided the authorization of up to $199.5 million to focus on the Seismic Mitigation Program, at the time the regulations was established, the criteria was set where Type 2 buildings qualified, and only a limited number of Type 2 buildings were qualified. And it also had to be married with having accelerated force of 1.68 Gs. At the time, June 2011, there was very limited activity that the board had seen was moving through the program. And so at that time, we had only 3 projects that had come in for funding, and less than $5 million had been drawn down on the funds. So the board did establish a seismic subcommittee, and with that, they expanded the regulations and they dropped the 1.68 Gs force as acceleration force as a requirement. They actually expanded the program to include additional Type 2 buildings, so they opened up to all the Type 2 buildings. They also wanted to address any liquefaction issues, landslide issues, faulting issues, and they also expanded the criteria to include any structural deficiencies as a result of the seismic event. So again, the program was expanded, and as a result, what we've been sharing with the board is the updates on the folks that are coming through the eligibility. There's been a number of projects that have been eligible and have qualified, and they've sought the eligibility approvals from the Division of State Architect. So far, we have 210 buildings that are currently eligible. And again, I shared with you that we did have a project that was approved in a consent agenda. We do have, draw your attention to page 110A. Although we have $174 million in the Seismic Mitigation Program as remaining bond authority, I wanted to share with you we have a number of projects in-house, nearly $6.6 million in-house that we should be bringing forward for funding processing, and that should be reflected by the July and August board. And we also have been working very closely with the Division of State Architect. They have a number of projects that are finalizing the Phase 4 approvals, and we have about 18 projects that are finishing up in that area, and we expect another $11.2 million to be drawn down on funds. So it's anticipated that the funds will be drawn down to about $156 million, hopefully by the end of the fall, early winter. And so these are the highlights we wanted to share tonight.
Thank you. As I understand, there's a number of districts with eligible buildings that have not submitted a funding application yet. And I'd like to ask Assemblymember Buchanan if this was one of the topics being addressed in the Program Review Subcommittee. If so, the Program Review Subcommittee could bring forward to full membership, recommend changes to the seismic program.
We're not we had a subcommittee a year ago which recommended eliminating the shaking requirements and the building type, and basically what we said is, you know, if you have a building that's in a seismic area and engineers can document that it is in need of rehabilitation or replacement, and DSA and OPSC agree with you, then those buildings are eligible for funds. And when you even though the money isn't going out as fast as maybe some people would like, just the process it takes to hire those engineers and decide what needs to be done and draw up the plans and actually work through. A year seems like a long time, but it's not really a long time. So I would point out that, first of all, we have far more projects in the queue than we had when we had the very restrictive requirements on it. But having said that, one of the areas that we're looking at in the subcommittee is, should we have a standalone seismic program? Should you be eligible automatically under modernization or new construction, since it is a 50-50 match program? Is there a way we should be streamlining that going forward, so you don't just have a pot of money, but it becomes a qualifying factor? And so we've had some sort of, I would say, very preliminary discussions, but we're now getting down to actually trying to take a look at each one of those areas, because what we would really like to do is figure out a way that we can streamline the program as much as possible in terms of being able to qualify projects and get money to them.
And Mr. Chair, let me,
Mr. Chairman, also on this side, when you get ready.
I'm sorry, since you started.
Assemblymember.
Thank you. I was going to say, you know, part of I think the hesitation, at least some testimony we heard earlier, this is again a year ago or so, was that two problems if a school district does this. One, you got to use their funds to actually do the initial report to become qualified. So I don't know if that's a way we can open up for those who suspect or, you know, overlap our maps on where the school districts are, but use some of this funds to actually do the testing. But when these school districts are so strapped for operational funds as it is, to go out and hire engineers and consultants to determine whether or not they have it. And then secondly, once they do get that determination, what kind of liability under now? You know, now that you know, now you're basically, if something happens, you're going to be sued tomorrow. So they have to be in the position to, you know, I guess be covered a little bit. So if I'm a, you know, superintendent or I'm a board, A, don't want to spend my operation money to determine this. B, do I really want to know? Because I really want to know, that means I have to do something about it. And do I have the funds to actually do something about it? So I don't know how we help that situation, but I think it's one thing to say I want to rebuild my building. But the other thing is, like, once I unravel this box, how far does it go and how much am I really going to be in trouble for? You know, do I move my kids out tomorrow once I find out I'm on a fault? You know, where am I going to move them to? Those type of things. And I think that's some of the hesitation we're seeing for people stepping up for the program.
Thank you,
And the
Senator.
50% match.
Thank you. Senator Hancock?
Thank you. I think the fact that we still have $156 million in this fund after all of these years indicates that we really should go back to our original plan, which was that if we didn't get enough new applications with the streamlining that we did, we would streamline more. and that we would adjust the shaking level downward, and we would include more buildings, more building types. And I think that we could do that. And I would actually, I think that the voters voted to keep this in a seismic fund, and that there is kind of a moral imperative to do that too, because if there was another seismic incident and schools collapse, but also things happen like unsecured lights fall on people's heads. I toured some of the schools after the earthquake. Yeah, well, it wasn't even Loma Prieta. It was 1994. Yeah, I remember that one in L.A. And so it was very dangerous. So I think that we have to get away from these narrowly crafted regulations and streamline more. And I was going to suggest that we might want to get recommendations from the state architect, the State Seismic Commission, and OPSC, and have them come back with some recommended regulatory changes at our August meeting. And let's get on with trying to make it easier for schools that have verifiable seismic problems to get the money.
So, Chair, I don't know if there's flexibility in the language, but one of the things from all the Prop 39 discussions we've had over the last few months is I like the idea of having a set amount that they could draw down to do the testing. And we should be able to use Seismic Commission, or somebody should say, hey, for me to look over these maps and study when at your school, if you suspect there's a problem, the preliminary investigation may be up to 5,000 or something, you know, some kind of number where they're not pulling out their operations for this. And then if there's any way we could match this up with that pot of money, with the other pot of money, with the emergency repair, where they don't have assets ready to rebuild, that we could put this out real quick. I mean, I think we all agree on this board, the number one thing we got to do is provide for the safety of these children. And if they're sitting on the fault line, I want to know about it, and I'd rather use that money versus building something else to make sure they're safe. And I don't know if that's an option or that's even possible within the funds.
So I'm a little bit, we completely eliminated the shaking factor. So we don't have to lower it, we eliminated that.
Okay.
And we made all building types eligible. And the reason we didn't get into the planning in terms of saying, here, you can have X $1,000 is because we were a little bit concerned that if we just gave money for engineering, there would be absolutely no money left for repairs. So my question is, because I myself never expected the money to go out in a year's time because of all the work that has to be done. If you want to build a new classroom wing, you probably aren't going to be here asking for money in 12 months' time. By the time you hire your architect, do your engineering and all that, and go through the approval process. So do we know how many, we know we've greatly increased the number of projects. Do we know how many projects now are in the queue at one place or another?
Yes, we do. There's about 100.
156 beyond.
Right,
See-
but we have a number of facilities at Division of State Architect that are in various phases.
Well, that's
of
what I mean. Do
approval.
we know how many are at DSA? Does that reflect that? Are the DSA, are they part of what you're listing as potentially committed, or are they part that would draw down from the $156 million?
That is included within the drawdown of the $156 million. We have 193 buildings that are currently in the pipeline at various stages of review, and a number of those buildings have estimates of what those project costs could be, and it's upward close to about $100 million. So
we have $100 million in projects in the queue right now.
that's correct.
That's beyond the 11 million you're reporting in this report?
Yes.
Yes.
Correct.
So I would
Oh,
maybe
well,
suggest
well,
that
yeah.
that the relaxing of the requirements that we did has, because
solved
it
the
took
No
us.
result.
Yeah.
That's
All right.
good.
Okay.
Have you gotten any feedback from these school districts at all about, is there a burden for them to go figure out, or they know they're there next to a fault, or, they do that preliminary investigation,
The buildings that we're talking about are already they have been confirmed that they qualify. So that they already know that they have buildings that qualify. Now they have to go through each of the additional phases to come in and request the funding. And just keep in mind that there's a lot of districts that have multiple buildings throughout their throughout their district. One of the things that we have been hearing is that they're focusing efforts on certain buildings while others are on hold until they move one project forward. So there's some districts that have, again, a lot of buildings within the district, and some of them are focusing their efforts on one project before they move on to the next.
And the only reason, I'm not trying to push this money out any faster than it actually needed to, but what we are talking about soon, probably in the next 6 to 8 months, is do we try to put a bond out for 14? And do we keep it categories? I like your idea about just making it a part of the criteria process, maybe bump you up if you have that safety issue. So we may not need a separate one. But what is our exposure? What does need to be happening in the state? And that survey, that information, again, no one can say we got $100 million more to do, or we got $1 billion more to do on earthquake type seismic. I don't know. And I'm just wondering, do we have enough information to piece that together if we start discussing things?
Districts have to come forward to figure out whether or not they have eligibility in their buildings. And right now, this is what we have. They have sought eligibility requirements and approval. So this is all the information we do have about that inventory of facilities.
If I may.
Absolutely.
clarify, because I think it's important to what's remaining. When you say that there's 118 million worth of projects potential, is that the list that's been identified for a long period of time? They know that they're potentially eligible, but they haven't come forward, or are you saying that those are potential buildings that have come forward with some type of request for an eligibility determination that is beyond those that we knew were in this category 4?
Those are the ones that have gone through what is called phase 1, which means that they have the right building type to qualify for the program. That is the first phase to get in the door, so to speak. Once you've identified an eligible building type, then you can move on to the next phases in terms of getting the appropriate reports from engineers and cost estimates. So these buildings we know qualify under the current regulation requirements.
So they had to take an active action to ask for that eligibility determination beyond being just a category 4 or any category now.
That's correct.
So there has, okay, so that's 100 million worth of projects.
Considering that the bond was passed in 2006, and when we formed the subcommittee, we'd only funded, I think, 2 projects. If you take a look at where we've come in the last year and the ones we have, like I said, in the queue,
I think it sounds good. The one thing that I would think we might just suggest, and maybe this would be something Mr. Savage would be more in his role than the rest of the staff, would be some kind of a letter to districts just saying, well,
right.
We did change the regulations. We have this much in requests. Now might be a time for you to look and decide if you want to move forward with your project.
Well,
in some very user-friendly language.
Well, and if some of these districts have let us know that they are targeting the most severe, but there are other buildings, my gut is, I think the bigger issue that we had when we had the subcommittee was the compelling testimony to me was from consultants or district folks who said, we had a building that was, in a seismic area, but wasn't the right building type, and it was in worse shape than another one, but we couldn't do anything. And so that's why we said, okay, let's really open it up. And I think the bigger question we need to ask ourselves, for those of us on the subcommittee, and you're always welcome to join, is should it be a separate category, or if you have a building that's just not safe, should that fall into another category, and should we simplify it?
Okay. Well, is there any public comment on this status report? Okay, hearing nothing, we can move on to the next item, tab 9.
Tab 9 is the workload, reflective of the 90 days. July, if you notice on page 111, it's a blank page. The purpose is to really focus on the consent agenda. And the items that we have slated for August is to bring back as an action item the high performance incentive grant options is included in the report section, in the action section, and that's in August. And we have the September workload as well.
Okay, thank you. Any public comment on the workload? If not, any final public comment from anyone on any other matter? So yes, some member.
Mr. Chair, just kind of give you a status update.
Sure.
We've been talking about a long time about possible assets that are not being utilized out in when we put in our 50% for properties or 100% for properties for future school sites. I've worked one of my bills is over on the Senate, or it's passed out of the Senate. I think it's going to come before pretty soon, AB 308. Which basically said if we were 50% partners here in the state with a local district and bought a vacant piece of property and that property is no longer being utilized for education purposes and it was sold, then we should get our 50% back. We were like joint ventures in these projects. I also included a portion where it had lease for school sites that weren't being used anymore for schools, but they were out, lease it to a private vendor for another purpose besides education. And I'm not sure how many of those are out there. On the Senate side, they pulled that section on the lease out of it, and they pushed it forward on the sale of the property at this point, which is good where we're at. But I want to bring it back to us and say, when we talked about before, there's a general consensus, we need to hopefully get the ones that are unused back into the system. You know, if we're putting out state dollars bond money for 30 years and paying on it, it's no longer being used for education to bring it back here. And so looking at different projects or different sheets, and I understand that apparently the school district's supposed to mark if they're leasing out some of their vacant property, but we have no more information than just that, yes, they are leasing out their property. Wondering if that's something we could give to staff to maybe come back with recommendations. Is it useful to have more of that information? Mm-hmm. At the same time, I don't want to be all penalized or penalty to the school districts. I want them to utilize their assets the best way to make money for both them and operations, as well as if we're a partner in that business venture, so to speak, to get some of our money back. I know there's a penalty if they sell a property and don't use it to rebuild schools right now or into school rehabilitation. They're off the list for 5 years. I'd like to see if we could change that. So I want them to voluntarily bring that back up. If they're going to give us back our investment out of that, if we're 50% or 100% or whatever, and they're willing to do that, but they should qualify for other programs as well. So I'm just bringing it up for discussion. Mm-hmm. My bill's been narrowed, and I don't know if it's going forward at this point, but I'm still concerned about, I see in the paper all the time about school districts shutting down schools. I know, like in our water appeal item today, there's plenty of schools vacant in that district, but they couldn't come up with an agreement. These are taxpayer dollars being used to educate our kids one way or the other. We want those taxpayer dollars used as wisely as possible. If they're not being utilized for that educational function, can we get our investment back and reprogram it out to those who need it?
My suggestion, is let's leverage the program review subcommittee right now. We're looking at, some of these issues right now, where the failures are, where the successes are, and how that informs any future type of bond. And my recommendation is put that in the program subcommittee and get a report back for the board.
Madam Chair.
Well, it ties in with what you've already brought up, so I think it makes perfect sense.
Any other thoughts? Public comment on? All right, hearing none. We'll adjourn.
I just have
Yes.
to ask, I'm so
Yes,
sorry.
Hancock.
I didn't exactly get what the action in that was, if any. If you were asking the program subcommittee to consider how to get out more of the seismic money, if Mr. Hagman was suggesting that maybe it should just go to anybody that wants it because we should spend it for schools, I just have to say, I do think that we have the moral imperative to spend it on schools that are seismically unsafe. We live in an earthquake country, and we at least have got to know that all the schools that were identified originally as needing this money know that there's whatever there is left after we process the existing applications and have decided that they don't, for whatever reason, want to comply.
I think, because we talked a little bit about, I don't think Senator Hagman was talking about seismic money. I think where the conversation started in the subcommittee was a situation where we provided matching funds for a district to buy land, and then the housing market changes, and the district never,
Okay, right. And
never,
they have to
and then
pay it back.
and then they sell the land, and then they keep, our half. So I think his
we don't
question
have that.
center, so I think the question there that we were kind of grappling with was, and his proposal in the bill is if you sell it within 10 years, you pay back the state. And I think his question surrounding you can certainly speak for yourself, but the leased property is around those same issues in terms of if you get money from the state and you're not building or you're not using it for kids. Certainly, if something's 40 years old, I don't think you want to. But the question is, are there parameters? And so I'm sure we'll have a discussion on it, and then everyone can chime in later on.
Before we formally adjourn, we do have an opportunity for folks who haven't been able to vote on the minutes. Senator Liu, Mr. Diaz, Senator. Aye. Well, can we reopen that? Or
Yes, we should. Senator Liu, how do you vote on the minutes? Aye. Thank you.
And the consent agenda.
And then Assemblymember Nazarian?
Yes.
On the consent calendar, or actually, even on the minutes too, how do you vote?
Yes, the vote.
Okay, yes to both. Okay, and that would also include Gateway, which was the appeal?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Everybody else
We're
good?
adjourned.
Cool.